Tonight, states prepare to push the Prime Minister to reinstate pandemic payments.
Of course, anything that we can do to support individual Victorians when they're in that situation, we should continue.
Also tonight, local residents forced to stay indoors after a truck spills tons of chemicals in Tullamarine. Tens of thousands head to the MCG to see one of the world's greatest sporting clubs. And mow your goat. Melbourne unleashes its new fleet of grass cutters.
You might call them lawnmowers, we call it conservation grazing.
Good evening, Mary Guerin with ABC News. Pressure is mounting on the Prime Minister to reinstate paid pandemic leave for casual workers with COVID. The $750 payment for workers who have no sick leave but are still required to isolate was cut 2 weeks ago. But as case numbers rise, the states will use next week's National Cabinet meeting to push for a rethink, as well as other measures like extending concessions for rapid antigen tests and changes to isolation rules. Leanne Wong reports.
For months, self-isolation payments have helped to limit the spread of the virus.
If they don't have the money, they may actually just go to work sick.
They do need it because they can't go out to work and it's really getting bad now. So that's why I wear the mask.
They've also been a lifeline for low-income earners.
This is literally a matter of life and death. Your health should not depend on your income or your postcode.
They got that choice of going without pay for a whole week, potentially limiting their ability to put food on the table to pay their rent, or they're going to have to either not get tested or ignore that test, go to work and potentially infect their co-workers.
The Prime Minister, fresh off his trip to the Pacific, has been briefed by the Chief Medical Officer and will meet with state premiers at a National Cabinet meeting on Monday. But he's so far resisted mounting calls pointing to budget pressures.
We'll give consideration to all of these issues, but we inherited these decisions, but we also inherited $1 trillion of debt.
Anthony Albanese said he would take responsibility and he would leave no one behind. He's failed both those tests this morning.
And the states are joining in the chorus to reinstate the payments.
I think it is unfair that when the state imposes public health orders on people that restrict their liberty and their capacity to work, for the government to not provide financial support.
We do see a case for ongoing pandemic leave support just during this next phase.
The Victorian government is expected to join the push to bring back the payments when National Cabinet meets next Monday. With hospitalisations surging, putting continued pressure on the healthcare system, it wants all measures considered that encourage people to isolate when they have COVID.
Anything that we can do to support individual Victorians when they're in that situation, we should continue.
In vulnerable circumstances that have been outlined, yeah, they probably do need to do that.
The Victorian government also wants the Commonwealth to extend the free rapid testing program for concession card holders and develop a strategy for increasing GP hours. Leanne Wong, ABC News, Melbourne.
A major clean-up of hazardous chemicals is underway at Tullamarine in Melbourne's north after a B-double truck crashed, spilling tons of herbicide. Emergency crews have spent the day cleaning up the mess. Roseanne Maloney has the details.
Burst at the seams, a B-double truck carrying tons of chemical herbicides with its load spilt down an embankment.
It's a really dynamic situation when we first arrive. We've got a rescue that we need to conduct and we've got a hazardous materials incident at the same time. It's a big clean-up.
At around 2 o'clock in the morning, the truck broke through the safety barriers at an exit ramp on the Western Ring Road in Tullamarine, rolling down the embankment.
We're just waiting to speak to the driver to find out exactly where and why he was going the direction he was.
A warning was sent out to residents in 5 surrounding suburbs, with hazardous fumes spreading through the area. Those closer to the crash were told to stay indoors.
For residents in the immediate area, so within 500 metres of this site, is to shelter in place.
Emergency crews worked for around 2 hours to remove the male driver from the wreckage. Despite the damage to the truck, he sustained only minor injuries.
Yeah, I'm surprised he's walked away.
These emergency crews have spent the day out here cleaning up the mess. Investigators are still working to determine exactly what happened here and what the long-term impacts of this chemical spill might be.
In discussions with our scientific advisors, it's really just a pick-up perspective that we need to deal with now.
Anyone who may have witnessed the incident or with dashcam footage is being asked to contact police. Roseanne Maloney, ABC News, Melbourne.
A week of top-level diplomatic talks in the Pacific has ended, with Anthony Albanese suggesting China's influence may have taken a knock. The Prime Minister's home from Fiji, confident that Australia's standing with its island neighbours has recovered, mostly because his government's answering the Pacific's calls to deal with what it's declared a climate emergency. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jetchitz reports from the Fijian capital, Suva.
You'll know where the good stuff is. A final meal together and a less formal farewell. Pacific leaders relaxing after wrapping up their first face-to-face meeting in years. The Prime Minister hailing his first forum a diplomatic success for Australia.
I went along, I said I would listen, we did listen. I said I'd show respect, I did show respect.
Anthony Albanese finishing his Fiji visit at a Suva training centre.
You're doing very well. So are you.
Where aged care workers are learning skills and preparing to come to Australia.
Where am I supposed to go?
Under an expanded Labor scheme.
We want to look at tourism, hospitality, but also disability care as well.
The federal government sees other reasons to celebrate, confident the Pacific is now convinced Australia's serious about tackling climate change.
It is obviously an issue which is felt existentially in the region.
Not everyone in the Pacific is sure, given Australia is still opening new coal and gas projects.
The climate crisis is there for all of us. It's not just the Pacific and the climate vulnerable countries, but the developed world is also facing this.
The Pacific is facing a balancing act when it comes to climate diplomacy. It wants to recognise that the new Australian government has ramped up ambition, even though leaders clearly want Australia to make faster and deeper cuts to emissions. One Pacific Island government source told the ABC that leaders were happy to give Australia some breathing space at this forum, but that demands were likely to be ratcheted up in the future. Meanwhile, China, largely excluded from the forum this year, is sounding slightly defensive.
China is ready to work with all countries who really care about the island countries.
The Prime Minister suggesting that Australia's gains this week may have come at Beijing's expense.
These things are all relative. By definition, if Australia is increasing our influence, then that has an impact.
But the contest is unceasing. Stephen Jetchitz, ABC News, Suva.
After days of fiery protests and outrage, Sri Lanka's president has now officially resigned. Gotabaya Rajapaksa stepped down via email after fleeing.